The vast desert stretched endlessly, broken only by jagged ruins that poked out of the sand like the bones of a forgotten civilization. Daniel Carter, a human scavenger, wiped the sweat from his forehead. The sun of this alien planet burned hotter than anything back on Earth, but he had come too far to turn back now. With careful steps, he moved through the ruins, his boots kicking up dust. His handheld scanner beeped faintly, detecting traces of precious minerals and ancient technology. This place was old, very old, but that only made the discovery more exciting. If he could find something valuable, he could sell it to collectors and finally leave this harsh, lonely life behind. His gloved hand brushed over a half-buried stone tablet, covered in strange alien symbols. He couldn't read them, but they looked important. He took a quick scan, saving the data for later. Just as he was about to move forward, a faint golden glint caught his eye. Curious, Daniel knelt and started digging with his hands, pushing aside layers of sand and small rocks. Something smooth and metallic lay beneath. After a few minutes of careful excavation, he pulled out a beautifully crafted golden mask. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The mask was shaped for a humanoid face, ornate and polished, yet ancient-looking. It had intricate engravings along its edges, and a pair of deep, hollow eye sockets that seemed to stare right through him. Strangely, the metal wasn't hot despite being buried under the sun-baked ground. Daniel turned it over in his hands, admiring its craftsmanship. His heart pounded. This had to be worth a fortune. The mask looked ceremonial, maybe even royal. If he could get it back to the nearest trade outpost, collectors would pay handsomely for such a rare artifact. But the moment he lifted it, the air around him changed. A deep, distant rumbling echoed through the ruins. The ground beneath him trembled. Somewhere far away, ancient doors groaned as they slowly creaked open. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. What had he just triggered? Before he could react, shadows moved at the edge of the ruins. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but then he saw them, figures emerging from the dust, moving swiftly and silently. He took a step back, gripping the mask tighter. The figures grew clearer, tall, humanoid beings with elegant, almost regal features. Their skin shimmered under the sunlight, a mix of silver and bronze tones. They wore long, flowing robes, marked with strange symbols that matched those on the mask. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. One of the figures, a tall alien woman with piercing golden eyes, stepped forward. She stared at the mask in his hands, then slowly dropped to her knees. And then, to Daniel's complete shock, the others followed her lead. Dozens of them, kneeling, heads bowed. A whisper spread among them, their voices speaking in hushed reverence. Though he couldn't understand the words, one thing was clear. They believed he was someone important. Daniel swallowed hard. What had he just gotten himself into? Daniel Carter stood frozen, his fingers still gripping the golden mask tightly. The air felt thick with tension. Dozens of alien figures knelt before him, their heads bowed in deep respect. He could hear their voices, murmuring in a strange language, but their tone was clear. They were honoring him. His heart pounded. What was going on? The tall alien woman with golden eyes slowly lifted her gaze. She studied Daniel carefully before speaking in a voice that carried both power and grace. "You have returned," she said in accented but clear English. Daniel blinked in shock. She knew his language. That was unexpected. He had met aliens before, but communication was never this easy. I don't understand," Daniel said, his voice uncertain. He gestured at the kneeling crowd. "Who do you think I am?" The alien woman's expression remained calm, but there was a deep intensity in her gaze. She motioned for him to follow. The crowd parted as she led him through the ruins toward a large entrance that had appeared when the ground shook earlier. Massive stone doors had shifted open, revealing a dimly lit tunnel. Daniel hesitated, going into an unknown alien structure with strangers. Not exactly a great idea, but he had little choice. Running now might offend them, and he was outnumbered. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. Inside, the walls of the tunnel glowed faintly with ancient blue light, as if the stones themselves remembered an old power. Strange symbols and carvings lined the passage. Daniel's scanner beeped wildly, detecting something, an unknown energy source pulsing deep within. The alien woman walked ahead confidently. "For many cycles, we waited," she said, her voice soft but filled with meaning. The lost emperor was prophesied to return when the mask was lifted once more. Daniel nearly stumbled. Emperor. Prophecy. This was getting ridiculous. "You think I'm your emperor?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Look, I think there's been a mistake. I'm just an explorer." The alien woman stopped and turned to him, her golden eyes sharp. "The mask chooses. It does not mistake." Daniel sighed. This was not good. The throne room of the ancients. The tunnel opened into a grand chamber, illuminated by soft golden light. A massive throne sat at the far end, carved from black stone and metal, ancient yet strangely powerful. The walls depicted scenes of battle, peace, and rulership, all centered around a figure wearing the very same golden mask Daniel now held. He swallowed hard. The alien woman stepped aside, allowing him to take in the sight. The others who had followed now stood in rows, waiting, expectant. A new figure stepped forward, a warrior. He was taller than the others, clad in dark armor with glowing patterns. His expression was not reverent like the others. His sharp eyes were filled with suspicion. "This human is not our emperor," the warrior declared. His deep voice echoed in the chamber. "He is an outsider, a scavenger. How do we know this is not a trick?" Daniel exhaled slowly. Finally, someone who wasn't blindly worshiping him. The alien woman turned toward the warrior, her voice firm. "The mask has accepted him. The mask is not proof." The warrior crossed his arms. "If he is truly our emperor, let him prove it." The air in the room tensed. The gathered aliens murmured among themselves. Daniel didn't like where this was going. "What do you mean, prove it?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. The warrior stepped forward, his armored boots clanking against the floor. "A trial. The burden of proof." The alien woman glanced at Daniel, her expression unreadable. "He does not know our ways. A trial is unfair." "Then let him fail." The warrior's voice was cold. "If he is false, he will not survive." Daniel clenched his jaw. This was spiraling out of control. He had just been looking for salvage, and now he was being dragged into some ancient alien power struggle. But there was no easy way out. The crowd was waiting. Their eyes held both hope and doubt. If he ran, they might see it as betrayal, or worse, deception. The alien woman sighed, turning back to Daniel. "You must face the trial of the forgotten throne." Daniel exhaled. He was no emperor, but if he wanted to get out of this alive, he had to play along. For now, Daniel Carter stood in the grand chamber, surrounded by towering alien figures. The air was thick with expectation, the whispers of the gathered crowd mixing with the faint hum of ancient energy pulsing through the walls. He felt trapped. A few hours ago, he had been nothing more than an explorer searching for valuable salvage. Now, he was being forced into a trial to prove he was an emperor. The golden-eyed alien woman, Soraya, looked at him with calm authority. She spoke softly, but her words carried weight. "The trial of the forgotten throne will determine if the mask has chosen true." Daniel sighed, gripping the golden mask in his hands. He didn't want this. He didn't want a throne, a prophecy, or a fight. But looking at the crowd, at the faces filled with hope and doubt, he knew he had little choice. He turned to Valor, the armored warrior who had challenged his claim. The alien's sharp gaze never left him. "What exactly does this trial involve?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Valor stepped forward. 3 challenges, each meant to test the mind, the heart, and the strength of a ruler. Daniel exhaled slowly. He had never been a king, a soldier, or a leader. How was he supposed to pass these tests? The first trial, the test of wisdom. Soraya led him to a separate chamber, a vast hall filled with floating stone tablets, each covered in alien symbols. In the center of the room, a single chair stood, surrounded by holographic projections of past rulers. The first trial is a test of wisdom, Soraya explained. The ruler must know the history of the XL Vorin, must understand their struggles, their victories, and their failures. Daniel's stomach twisted. He knew nothing about their history. Valor smirked. Let us see if your so-called mask will grant you the wisdom of the past. Daniel hesitated, then reluctantly placed the golden mask over his face. The moment the metal touched his skin, a surge of energy rushed through him. His vision blurred, and suddenly, he wasn't in the chamber anymore. Flashes of memories filled his mind. Battles, councils, alliances, betrayals. He saw rulers making impossible choices, leading their people through war, famine, and peace. It wasn't just knowledge. It was experience, burned into his mind like he had lived it himself. The visions faded. Daniel gasped, his breath shaky. His hands trembled, but his mind was sharp. Soraya watched him closely. Tell me, what was the greatest mistake of Emperor Xelray? Daniel didn't hesitate. He knew the answer. He trusted the Tyrak to honor their peace treaty, but they used it as a trick to strike when the empire was weakest. The air in the room shifted. The elders murmured in approval. Soraya nodded. You have passed the first trial. Valor narrowed his eyes. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The second trial, the test of heart. Daniel was led to a darkened chamber, where a massive metallic sphere hovered in the center. It pulsed with energy, glowing faintly. The second trial is the test of heart, Soraya said. The emperor must prove his ability to connect with the core of the empire. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Valor stepped forward, arms crossed. If the core rejects you, it will see you as a threat and strike. Strike. Daniel tensed. No one had mentioned anything about being attacked. Taking a deep breath, he approached the sphere. As he reached out, the metal shifted, pulsing faster. A strange warmth spread through his fingertips. He felt something. Not just power, but emotions, fear, hope, anger, sorrow. It was as if the core held the spirit of the people, their dreams and struggles. You are not just a ruler, you are their guide. The words whispered through his mind, and suddenly, the sphere glowed brighter. A moment later, the energy settled. The core had accepted him. Soraya nodded. You have passed the second trial. Valor clenched his jaw. The third trial, the test of strength. Daniel barely had time to recover before they led him to an arena. The stone floor was scarred from centuries of battle, and on the far side, a massive mechanical guardian powered to life. The third trial is combat, Valor said. The ruler must show they can defend the empire. Daniel's throat went dry. Fighting a robotic beast. Not exactly his specialty. The guardian charged, its blade-like arms swinging toward him. Daniel dodged, barely avoiding the strike. He needed a plan. Fast. He scanned the arena. The guardian was fast, but it was old. There had to be a weak point. Then he saw it, a glowing core on its back. Summoning every bit of courage, Daniel rolled under the next strike, grabbed a broken spear from the ground, and hurled it with all his strength. The spear pierced the guardian's core. Sparks erupted, and the machine staggered before it finally collapsing into dust. The arena fell silent. Then the crowd cheered. Soraya smiled. You have passed the final trial. Valor's eyes darkened, but he said nothing. Daniel had survived. But as he looked at the cheering crowd, he realized his problems were only beginning. Daniel Carter stood at the center of the grand arena, his heart still racing from the battle. The mechanical guardian he had defeated lay in ruins behind him, its broken parts scattered across the stone floor. The crowd of Selvoran aliens around him cheered and chanted, their voices echoing through the vast chamber. He had passed their 3 trials: wisdom, heart, and strength. By their rules, he was now their emperor. But deep inside, he knew the truth. He was just a human scavenger who had stumbled into an ancient prophecy. Valor, the armored warrior who had doubted him from the start, stood nearby, his expression unreadable. Soraya, the golden-eyed woman, stepped forward and bowed slightly. The trials have spoken. The mask has chosen. You are the rightful ruler of the Selvoran. Daniel forced a small, uneasy smile. Great. So what happens now? Soraya's expression grew serious. Now, you must lead us. A looming danger. Daniel barely had time to process her words when a loud chime rang through the chamber. The crowd fell silent. Soraya turned toward a floating panel on the wall. A transmission was coming in. The air shifted. A large hologram flickered to life, showing a terrifying sight. A Tyrek warship, massive and deadly, hovering just beyond the ruins of the Selvoran city. The Tyrek, brutal conquerors, slavers, destroyers of civilizations. And now, they were here. A deep voice crackled through the hologram. People of the Forgotten Empire, hear me. Daniel tensed as a Tyrek commander appeared on the screen, his reptilian features twisted into a cruel smirk. His sharp yellow eyes flickered with amusement as he continued. We have heard the rumors. The return of the Emperor. Lies. Your people are weak. Your time is over. The Selvoran warriors clenched their fists, their eyes burning with defiance. The Tyrek commander sneered. You have one chance. Surrender your city, your resources, and your so-called emperor, and we may spare some of you. The transmission ended. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, Soraya turned to Daniel. You must decide, my emperor. Daniel felt the weight of 100 eyes on him, waiting, expecting. His mouth went dry. He wasn't a leader, a ruler, or a warrior. But if he hesitated, they would lose faith. He took a deep breath. What do we have for defenses? Valor stepped forward, his voice firm. Our army is small. Our weapons are old. We are not prepared for war. Daniel cursed under his breath. This wasn't good. A leader's first test. Soraya studied Daniel carefully. If we surrender, the Tyrek will enslave us. If we fight without a plan, we will be destroyed. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. He had read enough history to know what happened to people who surrendered to tyrants. The Tyrek would take what they wanted, then crush the Selvoran anyway. They had only one option: fight. But how? His mind raced. Human ingenuity. That was the one advantage he had. He didn't know their tactics, but he knew Earth's history, how humans had turned the tide of impossible battles. A plan started forming in his mind. They couldn't win in a direct fight. But if they played smart, if they used deception, traps, and strategy, they might just survive. Daniel looked at Valor. You don't trust me. I get it. But right now, you need me. Valor narrowed his eyes. And why should we follow you? Daniel held up the mask. Because the mask chose me. And I don't plan on letting my people die. For the first time, Valor hesitated. He glanced at Soraya, then back at Daniel. Finally, he gave a short nod. Then lead us, Emperor. Preparing for war. The next few hours were chaos. Daniel gathered the Selvoran commanders, studying maps of the city, learning their old battle formations. He asked for their most skilled warriors and engineers. They didn't have big ships or powerful weapons, but they had stealth, knowledge of their own land, and a people desperate to survive. Daniel laid out his strategy. Lure the Tyrek into the ruins. Make them think they were winning. Set traps in the ancient tunnels. Use collapsing structures to cut off their forces. Strike at their weak points. The Tyrak rely on heavily armored soldiers, but their energy packs and weapons were vulnerable. Separate the enemy forces. The Tyrak weren't invincible. They just never fought someone like a human before. As the plans formed, Daniel felt a strange feeling growing in his chest. For the first time, he wasn't just a scavenger looking for treasure. He was a leader. The final decision. As the preparations continued, Soraya approached him. "I see now why the mask chose you," she said. Daniel gave a small, tired laugh. "I don't even know if the mask really did choose me, but right now, that doesn't matter." She nodded. "Then let us fight, Emperor." The Tyrak fleet was preparing to strike. But this time, the XL Vorin wouldn't be helpless. And Daniel Carter, the scavenger who had never wanted a throne, was about to lead them into battle. To be continued. Closing hook for the audience. The war was coming. The enemy was stronger, ruthless, and prepared for victory. But they had never faced a human before. Would Daniel's strategy save the XL Vorin, or would he lead them to their doom? The Tyrak warship loomed over the ruins, its dark metal reflecting the fading sunlight. Inside the hidden underground city, Daniel Carter stood before a gathered force of Vorin warriors, engineers, and scouts. His mind raced. The Tyrak were stronger, better equipped, and experienced in crushing weaker civilizations. But humans had a history of defying impossible odds. Daniel turned to Valor, the armored warrior who had once doubted him. "Are the traps set?" Valor nodded, his face still unreadable. "Our tunnels are rigged. The moment they enter, we collapse the passage behind them." Soraya, the golden-eyed alien woman, stepped forward. "The people are afraid, but they trust you now." Daniel took a deep breath. He had never been a ruler, never been a soldier. But now, an entire civilization was depending on him. The ground rumbled. The Tyrak were here. The first strike. The attack came swiftly. Explosions shook the ruins as Tyrak drop ships descended from the sky, landing just outside the ancient structures. Daniel, along with Soraya and Valor, watched from a hidden vantage point. Hundreds of Tyrak soldiers emerged, tall, reptilian creatures clad in heavy battle armor. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy as they spread out, searching for the city's entrance. "They think this will be easy," Daniel muttered. A Tyrak officer barked an order, and the soldiers marched forward, unaware of the traps waiting beneath them. As they stepped onto the ancient stone pathway, Daniel gave the signal. A deep rumble echoed through the ruins. The ground beneath the Tyrak forces gave way. The first wave of soldiers plummeted into a hidden pit, where the Vorin had placed explosive charges. A massive explosion lit up the battlefield. The Tyrak had walked right into their first trap. Cheers erupted among the hidden Vorin fighters. But Daniel knew this was just the beginning. The Tyrak adapt. The Tyrak weren't fools. They quickly adjusted, spreading their forces to avoid more traps. Their energy cannons blasted through stone walls, forcing the Vorin to retreat deeper into the ruins. Daniel clenched his fists. They couldn't win in a direct fight. "Valor, lead your best warriors into the tunnels. Attack from the shadows. Make them think there are more of us than there really are." Valor nodded and vanished into the tunnels, taking a squad of skilled fighters with him. Soraya placed a hand on Daniel's arm. "You are thinking like a ruler." Daniel exhaled. No, he was thinking like a survivor. Guerrilla warfare. Deep inside the ruins, the battle turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Vorin warriors ambushed Tyrak patrols, using hit-and-run tactics before disappearing into the tunnels. Energy blasts lit up the darkness as Daniel's people fought with everything they had. The Tyrak, frustrated and overconfident, pushed deeper into the ruins, exactly as Daniel had planned. One by one, they triggered more traps, falling debris, collapsing tunnels, and hidden mines placed along the narrow paths. Daniel watched the battle unfold on a holographic map, his mind focused. They were slowing the enemy down, but it wasn't enough. We need to take out their leader. Soraya frowned. The Tyrek commander is still on his warship. Daniel's mind raced. If they cut the head off the snake, the body would fall apart. He turned to the engineers. Do we have anything that can breach their ship? An elder Exelvoran hesitated before answering. There is an old war machine. It was built to destroy enemy ships, but it hasn't been used in centuries. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Then it's time to bring it back. The final gambit. With Soraya guiding him, Daniel rushed through the tunnels toward the ancient war machine. It was massive, covered in dust and forgotten technology. This thing still works? Daniel asked, half in disbelief. Soraya nodded. It was built for emperors to use in times of great war. It will respond to you. Daniel took a deep breath and placed his hands on the control panel. The golden mask pulsed with energy. The war machine came to life. A deep hum filled the chamber as the forgotten weapon powered up, its ancient cannons charging with raw energy. Daniel grinned. Let's send a message to the Tyrek. The tide turns. Above the ruins, the Tyrek warship hovered, its commander watching the battlefield with amusement. These weak creatures think they can resist us, he muttered. Then, without warning, a massive energy blast tore through the sky. The Tyrek commander barely had time to react as the ancient Selvoran war machine fired a devastating shot directly into the warship's engines. Boom! The ship lurched to the side, flames bursting from its hull. Alarms blared. The once invincible vessel was now crippled. On the ground, the Tyrek forces hesitated. Their leader was wounded. Their ship was falling. Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm. Tell your commander that Selvoran bow to no one. The message was clear. The battle had changed. The battle's end. As the Tyrek forces began to retreat, Daniel exhaled in relief. They had survived. Soraya looked at him with admiration. You have done what no ruler before you could. Valor approached, still covered in battle dust. He stared at Daniel for a long moment before bowing slightly. I was wrong about you, human. You are more than we believed. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. Great, but something tells me this isn't over yet. Soraya nodded. No, the Tyrek will return. And next time, they won't underestimate us. Daniel glanced up at the sky, watching the damaged Tyrek warship limp away. He wasn't a scavenger anymore. He was a leader now, and he had a war to prepare for. Daniel Carter stood at the highest point of the ruined city, watching as the Tyrek warship retreated, leaving behind smoke and destruction. They had won this battle, but he knew the enemy would return, stronger, angrier, and more prepared. The Exelvoran warriors around him cheered, but he could see the exhaustion in their eyes. Their city was damaged, their people shaken. This victory was temporary. Soraya stepped beside him, her golden eyes filled with admiration. You have done what no ruler before you could, Daniel. Daniel sighed. Yeah, and how long until the Tyrek come back? Valor, the once doubtful warrior, approached. They will return. We wounded their pride. The next attack will be worse. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. He wasn't a king, but now he had an empire to protect. Rebuilding and preparing for war. The city was in ruins, but Daniel refused to let the people give up. He ordered the engineers to repair the defensive weapons. He asked the scouts to study the Tyrek, to learn everything they could about their ships, their weaknesses, their tactics. If we wait for them to attack again, we lose, Daniel said. We need to be ready before they return. Soraya nodded. Then we must awaken the last remnants of our empire. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Soraya led him deep into the underground chambers, where the walls glowed faintly with ancient energy. At the center stood a massive circular door, sealed for centuries. This, she said, is the vault of the ancestors. Inside, according to legend, were the last war machines, forgotten weapons, and lost technology of the Selvoran Empire. Daniel's heart pounded. If they could unlock this vault, they might stand a chance against the Tyrak. But the door would not open easily. The secret of the vault. Valor placed his palm against the door. We have tried for generations to open this. Only the true emperor can command the ancient vault. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't their real emperor, but somehow, the golden mask had recognized him. Slowly, he stepped forward and placed the mask over his face. The air crackled with energy. The symbols on the door glowed brightly, reacting to his presence. The mask pulsed, sending a strange warmth through his body. Then, the door began to move. Stone and metal shifted with a deep rumble, and for the first time in centuries, the vault of the ancestors opened. Inside, rows of sleek, powerful machines stood waiting, untouched by time. Soraya gasped. "It is all real." Daniel exhaled. "Now we have a fighting chance." The Tyrak returned. Just as they began studying the ancient weapons, alarms rang throughout the city. A scout rushed in, his face pale with fear. "The Tyrak are back." Daniel's stomach dropped. That was too fast. Soraya's eyes widened. They must have already been preparing for this attack. Daniel ran to the highest tower. In the distance, a massive fleet of Tyrak warships filled the sky. This was not a small force. This was an army. They aren't here to fight. They're here to wipe us out. Valor clenched his fists. "We fight to the end." Daniel shook his head. "No, we fight to win." The last stand begins. With no time to waste, Daniel ordered the warriors to man their positions. The engineers activated the ancient weapons, and the XL Vorin people prepared for the greatest battle of their lives. The first Tyrak ships fired, and explosions rocked the city. Buildings crumbled. Fires spread. Daniel jumped into the cockpit of one of the ancient war machines. It roared to life, its controls sensing with his mind through the mask. He gripped the controls and spoke through the city's communication system. "We will not fall today. We fight for our future." The XL Vorin warriors roared in response. Then, the battle truly began. Daniel versus the Tyrak commander. The XL Vorin forces fought fiercely, using their newly awakened war machines to push back the invaders. But the Tyrak were relentless. Then one of the largest Tyrak warships descended onto the battlefield. From it, a towering Tyrak commander emerged, heavily armored, holding a massive energy blade. "Bring me the false emperor," he growled. Daniel stepped forward, gripping his own weapon. "You want me? Come and get me." The two leaders charged at each other. Daniel had never fought like this before, but the mask guided him, filling his mind with knowledge of past emperors, their battle skills, their instincts. The Tyrak commander was strong, but Daniel was faster. He dodged a heavy strike and countered with a precise blow to the enemy's weak spot. The Tyrak commander staggered, roaring in pain. Daniel raised his weapon. "This is for my people." With a final strike, he defeated the Tyrak commander. The Tyrak forces saw their leader fall. Panic spread. Without their commander, they were lost. Then, the XL Vorin war machines fired a final wave of attacks, destroying the remaining warships. The Tyrak retreated in fear. The battle was over. The rise of a new empire. The XL Vorin people gathered, cheering, chanting Daniel's name. Valor, once his greatest doubter, now knelt before him. "You are our ruler. You have saved us." Soraya smiled. "You were not born an emperor, but you have become one." Daniel looked at the golden mask in his hands. He had never wanted power, but now he had a people to protect. He placed the mask back on his face and turned to the crowd. "The XL Vorin will rise again, and I will lead you to a new future." The people roared in approval. Daniel Carter had come searching for treasure. Instead, he had found a throne. The ruined battlefield was now silent. Smoke drifted through the air, mixing with the golden light of the setting sun. The Tyrak were gone, their warships either destroyed or retreating beyond the clouds. Daniel Carter stood at the heart of the Voran city, surrounded by thousands of cheering warriors. He had led them to victory, but he still couldn't believe it. He had come here as a scavenger, searching for old relics. But now, he was their emperor. Soraya stepped beside him, her golden eyes filled with pride. It is done. The Tyrak have fallen. We are free. Valor, the once doubtful warrior, now knelt before Daniel. I was wrong about you, human. You have earned the throne. The Voran people bowed before him, chanting his name. They truly believed he was their rightful ruler. But deep inside, Daniel knew the truth. He wasn't their emperor. And now, he had a choice to make. A leader's burden. Later that night, Daniel stood alone on the high balcony of the emperor's palace. The city below was alive with celebration, music, and light. But in his heart, he felt the weight of responsibility. Soraya approached him. You are troubled. Daniel sighed. This was never supposed to happen. I was just looking for salvage. She tilted her head. And yet you fought for us. You led us. The mask chose you for a reason. Daniel held the golden mask in his hands, its smooth metal warm to the touch. I don't even know if the mask really chose me, he admitted. Maybe it just reacted to human DNA. Maybe this was all a mistake. Soraya shook her head. You think too much like a human. The mask does not choose lightly. Daniel exhaled. Could he really rule these people? The council's demand. The next morning, the elders of the Voran gathered in the palace. Valor spoke first. With the Tyrak defeated, we must rebuild our empire. But we need a strong ruler. Soraya nodded. The people will follow you, Daniel. They trust you. Daniel hesitated. And what if I say no? The room fell silent. Valor's expression darkened. Then we will be without a leader. The Tyrak may return. Other enemies may come. Without a ruler, we will fall into chaos. Daniel clenched his jaw. This was too much. He had never wanted power. He looked around the room. They weren't forcing him to stay, but they needed him. If he left, would they survive? The final decision. That night, Daniel returned to the vault of the ancestors, the ancient chamber filled with forgotten war machines and knowledge. He placed the golden mask on his face and let it connect to his mind once more. Visions filled his thoughts. The past rulers, their struggles, their triumphs, their burdens. One thing was clear. Being a ruler was never about being born for it. It was about choosing to lead. Daniel removed the mask and took a deep breath. He had made his choice. The human emperor. The next morning, Daniel stood before the people, dressed in the traditional robes of the Voran emperor. The crowd fell silent, waiting. Finally, he spoke. I did not come here to be your ruler. I came here as an explorer, a wanderer. The people listened, their faces filled with uncertainty. But I have seen your strength. I have fought beside you, and I will not turn my back on you now. Asterisk, asterisk. The silence broke into cheers. Soraya smiled. Valor bowed deeply. Daniel Carter, the scavenger who had never wanted a throne, had become the emperor of a lost civilization, and he would lead them into a new future. Epilogue. A new dawn. As the sun rose over the city, Daniel looked to the stars. This was only the beginning. The Tyrak were defeated, but new dangers would come. He had a people to protect. He had a throne to defend. And for the first time in his life, he had found his purpose. Daniel Carter was no longer just a scavenger. He was the emperor of the Voran.